So this is our Polestar Model 2 that we rented down here in Florida. It looks a lot like a Volvo S40. And I think it's got a bunch of the same components, same platform. But it's the electric one. And like I said, they call it the Polestar Model 2. Got a 78 kilowatt hour battery, which is about halfway between like the Model 3 and the Model S Tesla. And it's got 300 kilowatts of power, which is about, what, 225, give or take? And that number does not do it justice, because this car flies. This car absolutely flies. And we rented it because we just never driven one. And we were in Miami a couple days ago, taking care of some business down there. And we're about to head up to the Fort Myers area and needed to grab a rental car. And now we're in the Palm Beach area. We're about to drive out to the airport. And it's actually got Google Maps built into the PBI car rental. And so Google Maps is its like operating system, kind of the same way that Tesla has their own proprietary software. A lot of cars have CarPlay. Ford has their own Ford navigation system, and this thing has Google Maps. I think Android might be it might actually be on the Android operating system. It's not entirely clear. You can also use CarPlay with it.
Take the next right, then turn left.
You can use CarPlay, but in most cases you don't really need to, because the built-in Google Maps. The built-in Google Maps is good enough. And it's got an instrument cluster in the dashboard, unlike the Tesla Model 3 and Model Y, but similar to the way the Model S and the Model X have a dashboard instrument cluster, as well as a touchscreen in the center.
In a quarter mile, continue on to US 441 South.
And it's actually surprising how likable this car is. Again, it says it's got 300 kilowatts of power, which is about 225 horsepower, give or take. The horsepower being 75% of what the kilowatts are, if that makes sense. So if it says 100 kilowatts, then that's 75 horsepower. And this thing having 300 kilowatts of total power, that means it's about 225 total. But the thing with electric cars is just like with diesels, they have like tremendous amounts of torque. And torque is what you actually feel. Torque is thrust. Torque is what actually pins you back in your seat. You can't actually feel horsepower. Horsepower is just torque multiplied by speed. And you never, you don't feel speed. You feel yourself getting pinned to the seat. And that's what the torque will do for you. So compared to a car with more horsepower, this thing will take off much, much, much faster, because of the fact that the torque from the electric motors is instantaneous.
Use the left 2 lanes to turn slightly left toward South State Road 7. Use the left 2 lanes to turn slightly left toward South State Road 7, then continue straight onto South State Road 7.
And so it gives you turn-by-turn directions, which are nice. It also tells you about your text messages that are coming in, and that's wireless, that's over Bluetooth. But the thing that the Google Maps does not do, it's hard to tell where you can actually turn off the prompts. Okay, there you go, right there. Mute. Okay, so it's not actually giving you spoken turn-by-turn directions.
To adjust the volume of the voice guidance, use your car's volume controls. To adjust the volume of the voice guidance, use your car's volume controls.
Okay, so look at that. You can actually adjust like it said, the volume of the voice guidance, and that's pretty nice too. But there's nothing not to like about the way the instruments are laid out. It's got your little speedometer there in the corner, and for some reason, the fact that it's in front of you on the dashboard makes it 1,000 times easier to read than if it's off to the side on a center screen like the way the Tesla has it. And you also have some navigation like prompts here, visual navigation prompts, and then you have a bigger version of your map here. And so it's just nice.
South State Road 7. Continue on South State Road 7 for 3/4 of a mile.
And again, it takes off like a rocket. If you need to get around somebody because they're blocking the passing lane, it's just no big deal. It's just the easiest thing to do. And the other thing it does is similar to the Model 3, the Model Y, all the Teslas. It has very, very aggressive regen braking, otherwise known as engine braking. Well, it's got that same effect as if you're in first gear at 5,000 RPMs. You let off the gas and it immediately starts braking very, very aggressively. And as a result of that, you practically never use the brake pedal. If you actually have to get on the brake pedal, it means you are going entirely too fast. But it's no big deal to accelerate up to 50, 60, 70, and then just let off the gas, and the car will decelerate easily, as aggressively as you need it to, and to the point where, again, you're never, ever using the brakes unless, there's an emergency, or unless you just kind of took off a little bit too fast.
Continue on Belvedere Road for 7 miles.
But that's the acceleration right there. I don't know exactly how fast it goes 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 or what have you. Somebody else has measured that, and we're not really trying to do that. But again, the sensation of speed is absolutely intoxicating. I mean, it just launches. And that's what's fun about driving electric cars. People say, "Oh, I prefer a gas car." There's nothing else like the feel of a gas-powered car. But to be honest, once you drove in an electric car a couple of times, the feeling the electric car gives you of taking off like a bat out of hell, taking off like a rocket, is you get used to it. And then when you get back into a gas engine car, even a fast one, it still takes some amount of time between when you put your foot down and when it starts moving. And every car that you get into after you drive one of these things feels slow. Anyway, the controls are all relatively logically laid out. Again, you can set it up to where it does full one pedal driving, where all you're doing is on and off the gas pedal. And so the gas pedal is basically your accelerator and your brake. Or you can turn that completely off and then use the brake pedal as you normally would. There are a decent amount of settings you can mess with. There are a couple things you can't do. And there are two. One of them is very, very major. You can't actually have the car drive itself. It does not have an autopilot system, even a very rudimentary one. It has something called lane keeping, and really lane keeping just sort of bumps you back into the lane once you're like almost completely outside the lane. But it doesn't do the driving. It doesn't keep you centered in the lane. And so that's a little bit annoying because every single Tesla comes with autopilot standard as a standard feature, to where it will do the driving, and all you're doing is supervising. You're keeping your hand on the wheel, obviously, but you're just supervising, and the car is doing the driving. With this thing, no, you are doing all the driving. And once you've gotten used to autopilot, that's kind of tough to live without, because yesterday we drove about 200 plus miles. We went from Miami out to through Alligator Alley out to Naples, which is an absolutely beautiful area if you've never been to it. And from Naples we went up the coast there, through some very, very beautiful areas that were just absolutely devastated by the hurricane last fall. Fort Myers Beach, and a couple of the other areas surrounding it were it looks like a nuclear bomb went off there. We drove through Fort Myers right after sunset, and there were 20-story high-rises right there on the beach, and they were empty, and the lights were off, and they were fenced off, because who knows, maybe there was structural damage, maybe the foundation had erosion or shifted or something, because no matter how strong they built those buildings, to withstand a Cat 5 hurricane, the foundation still had, I'm sure it had massive amounts of erosion with the storm surge and everything. And so the entire city of Fort Myers Beach, it looks like, if you've ever been to Detroit and you know that sort of feeling of total blight and emptiness and like the city was abandoned, as you get when you drive in Detroit, Fort Myers Beach had that same feeling. And there were massive piles of rubble that had been bulldozed up, and there were still a lot of structures that were destroyed and a lot of houses that were just crushed, some vehicles that were destroyed that we saw. And so that was really sad. You know that there are many thousands of people that essentially were turned into refugees in the space of a couple hours and will probably never return. And others who will return, it's going to take them years to build back. And so that's exceptionally sad. And 6 months later, there has been very little progress that we could see. Again, right down there by the water. And it's possible that there has been some rebuilding, but the overwhelming sense you get is of complete devastation, as if the hurricane just came through a couple weeks prior. But we put a couple hundred miles in the car, and it made it up to a place called Ponte Vedra, a new development called Babcock Ranch, which was actually built specifically to be hurricane proof. It's at maybe 30 or 40 feet of elevation, and it's got its own, it's I don't know, hundreds of acres, a couple hundred acres, maybe 1,000 acres, who knows. But very large portions of it were actually sold back to the state by the developer to be a permanent preserve. And so he built on like a quarter of it, 25% of it. And there are, everything about it, again, was built to survive a direct hit from a Cat 5 hurricane. And it did take a direct hit from Hurricane Ian. Never lost power because it has, like, I think 150 megawatts of on-site power generation, and it's got power storage, and all the utilities are buried, and the water and the internet and all that stuff. And so the eye of the hurricane went right over it. Nobody lost any shingles. Nobody lost any windows. A couple of trees came down, but for the people who live there, yeah, they were fine. Astonishing the difference when you just go a little bit in from the coast and get a little bit of elevation above sea level. How much better you can do in terms of surviving a storm like that. Something on the Google Maps, you're not going to get the satellite picture on your Google Maps. All you're going to get is the standard sort of black and white or grayscale or whatever they call it. However, if you plug into CarPlay, and the only way you can activate CarPlay on this thing is by plugging it in. It's not wireless CarPlay like you get in the new F-150. You will get your CarPlay map, and if you set it to satellite on your phone, then yes, you'll have an actual satellite map on the display screen here, which again is nice. But it's also nice having built-in Google Maps, because look what that gives you. It actually tells you what your battery's going to be when you arrive. So you will know if you're driving a little bit too far. 260 miles of range is not a lot. It's not a huge amount. The Model Y, I think, long range has 330. And I think the Model 3 long range might even have more, like 350. And so 260 does not sound like a lot. But it got us through the day yesterday. Again, Miami all the way to Fort Myers, Ponte Vedra. And then today, all the way from Fort Myers on the western coast of the state, sort of southwest Florida, they call it, all the way back over to Palm Beach. And so today we've gone, I don't know, 150 miles, 180 miles, something like that. Or maybe a little bit less, probably closer to 125. But we have not been babying this thing. I mean, without confirming or denying it, I'll just say, again, with the tremendous advantage an EV gives you is that if you need to get somewhere in a hurry, it will facilitate that comfortably. You see a gap in traffic, a tiny little gap that you wouldn't even try to get through in a gas burning car. This thing will go right through it easily and in complete control. Again, you let off the gas. We're not doing any braking here. The car is doing all the slowing down. Okay, we got on the brakes at the end. But for the most part, it does all the braking, and that's regen, so it goes back into the battery, and it preserves the life of your brake pads. We know that because we had a Model S Tesla for about 2.5 years, put 50,000 miles on it, and by the time we got rid of it, it was at 85,000 miles because we bought it used, and we had not had to touch the brake pads. So it had the original brake pads, and this is a big, big, heavy sports car, sports sedan, and it still had the original brake pads at 85,000 miles. And no warping or pulsing on the rotors either, because you're doing so much what you might call engine braking or regen braking. Another huge advantage of the EVs. The ventilation system, the HVAC, works fine. You just put it on automatic, and it takes care of things. It's got a heated seat, heated steering wheel, which I think they encourage you to use in the winter months, because that way you don't have to use as much of the HVAC system. It's got, it's got everything a normal car has. It's also got a frunk, obviously, and the way you open the frunk is it's got like a traditional hood release. It doesn't have some kind of remote, some kind of button hidden somewhere. And it actually took a while to figure out because it wasn't on the remote, on the key fob. It's actually a traditional hood release lever that you pull, and it mechanically pops the hood. And then you open the hood up and you find an astonishingly small frunk compared to a Tesla, compared to a lot of other cars. Very, very small. Kind of an afterthought almost. The charging port is in, it's behind a normal looking fuel door to the left rear of the car, in the left rear corner, just like a Tesla. And whereas most other EVs have the charging port in the left front fender, this thing has it in the left rear. So you'd be backing your car into the garage when you park it if you buy one and you plug in your charger at home. I don't know exactly the charging speed. It got to a friend's house yesterday evening at maybe 9 or 10 p.m. Plugged the car in to her 240 outlet in the garage. At 6 a.m. it was fully charged. So I'm not sure exactly how fast it charges in terms of the amps at 240 or the kilowatts or whatever, but it does the job. The seats, the glove compartment, everything is very, very normal. It's got a panoramic sunroof, which does not open. It's just a fixed pane of glass, like in the newer Teslas, unlike the 2016 Tesla that we had. Again, the lack of an autopilot is kind of a big deal, and that would prevent us from buying this car, because we do so many road trips to where we're spending hours and hours on the highway that we kind of need the car to be doing the driving for us, because it cuts down your workload and your mental fatigue by about 90+%. And apparently a Tesla with the autopilot engaged is the safest car on the planet. And I think they measure that statistic in terms of accidents per million miles or deaths per million miles. But the top 4 cars in terms of lowest numbers of deaths per million miles are all Teslas with the autopilot engaged. Without the autopilot engaged, it goes down a little bit. And once you've gotten used to autopilot, you just can't live without it. The sound system is very, very good. Again, you're only going to be using Bluetooth audio, or you're going to be using your wired CarPlay, and you got to plug in your CarPlay on a USB-C, not a regular USB. And so they're sort of moving you out of the conventional USB mode, and everybody's going to be in USB-Cs here sometime soon. Didn't see a traditional cigarette lighter outlet, and that's fine. And we also didn't see a 120 outlet, which is so disappointing in a car like this that is an electric car. Just like you don't have a 120 in a Tesla either. I think the Hyundais have a 120. I think the Hyundais have a 240, maybe. But it just seems like such a no-brainer in a car that has such a large battery. The Ford Lightning has 120 and 240 outlets, just like the Ford Power Boost, which is not an electric vehicle. But it's just like, come on, guys! Like, how hard would it have been to put in a 120 in the dashboard? So you can plug in your laptop or what have you, or you can plug in other items. The body, it looks like a sedan. It looks like a small sedan, about the size of a Tesla Model 3, but it doesn't have quite as much room. You know, your knees, you kind of feel like you're jammed into a cockpit here, and you're gonna get a little bit cramped if you're doing long road trips.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto Morrison Avenue.
And so that's a little bit disappointing. Okay, Hertz return. So we gotta like flip around or something. So it doesn't have quite the room that a Tesla Model 3, Model Y, any of the Teslas do. You're kind of jammed in there. Headroom is just fine.
Avenue, then continue straight onto James L. Turnage Boulevard.
Okay, we'll jump off of here. Yeah, headroom is absolutely fine, but knee room, no. If you're like a 6-footer, it's going to be kind of cramped. What else? We talked about the frunk. The body style, again, it's a dead ringer for the Volvo S40. And that's because the Polestar is made by Volvo or in conjunction with Volvo, or it's some kind of a division of Volvo, except that it makes EVs instead of conventional cars. And so they're basically taking the shell or the platform, the body of an S40, and they gut it, take out the engine, transaxle or transmission or what have you, and make it an electric vehicle. And so it works. It's a good-looking car. We've had a lot of people in just the last 24 hours who've been driving it. Had a lot of people come up and compliment the appearance, and they were just curious. And nobody knows what it is. They're like, "What the hell is that thing?" It looks good though. It's a nice color. It's a sort of light gray, and compared to the times we've rented Teslas, compared to what we owned a Tesla. This thing seems to get a lot more curiosity and a lot more interest. And what the hell happened here? Speak of the devil, somebody's having their Tesla towed in back to Hertz. But no, again, a lot of compliments from the people who, they come up to us in parking lots and pass along their best regards. We're going to jump out here in a second. God damn, it's like a mess in here. The shift lever is right there. And we found ourselves a number of times hitting the wiper stock when we went to put it in reverse, because the Tesla shift lever is to the right of the steering wheel. It's a stock. That's reverse, that's forward. And then park is just that little button there. All right. We'll get out here in a second. Again, once you get used to the feeling of driving EV, it's tough to give up. Okay, there we are. Put it in park. Done. And then as soon as you stand up, the car turns off. And get out of the driver's seat. So overall, again, we really like it, but would not buy it, mostly because of the lack of an autopilot and the lack of overall roominess. But it's a neat looking car. If you want to get an EV and not have a weird looking car, which a Tesla is admittedly a very weird looking car, this is a good choice. And that is our experience driving the Polestar. Thanks, everyone.